what I really love, which is I just love working with people interested in entrepreneurship, whether you want to be a founder or you want to work on a really high growth team, or maybe you want to be entrepreneurial inside of a company or something like that. The skills of entrepreneurship that we teach across all those programs you mentioned are great life skills. And that's my favorite part of my job, is I get to work with students and work with companies. So thanks for having me today. Great overview of all the activity on campus, quite robust. And now we're going to drink from the fire hose some more, and we're going to talk about the Austin startup scene. And what's great about it is that Austin and UT startup scene is integrated. So I always love to start this presentation with a little bit of context setting history, because some people may think that Austin just became a startup scene or a tech scene. And when you look back at the growth of Austin over time, it actually goes back to the 1930s. So Motorola, which was back in the 30s doing, something really tech, which was batteries. Batteries was huge tech back in the 30s. And that was a Department of Defense contract, which is really at the roots of a lot of what became the tech sector. So if you will, I'd like to take you on a little journey about the last 60, 70 years in Austin's tech sector, and tie it back to a lot of the activity that you heard Amanda talk about and that I'm going to share about. So in the 50s, a company called Texas Instruments, we don't generally carry calculators around in our pocket anymore in a form other than a phone, but we used to carry around Texas Instruments scientific calculators. They were actually really cool. And Texas Instruments was here in Austin. There was a company called Tracor in the 50s, which was actually the first Fortune 500 company spun out of the University of Texas. And that was, just to give you a little context, about the time that Research Triangle Park was formed in North Carolina. So I'm sure many of you have thought about working in the tech sector. You know about RTP, you know about Silicon Valley. Austin was right up there with them in those early days of big companies doing defense related technology type of work. And so when you cycle into the next decade of work, you get into the 70s, and Austin was a $4 billion economy at that time. To give you context, it's over 150 billion now, right? So in the 70s, we saw Motorola shift gears from batteries to building semiconductors. And they built a semiconductor plant here. I believe it was 1974. Don't quote me on that, even though it's recorded. You'll quote me on it. But it was in the 70s. Motorola built a semiconductor plant. National Instruments was founded in 76 by Jim Truchard and Bill Nowlin. Went on to create an amazing company that did a lot of the software interfaces for data systems. That company created a lot of wealth for generating the flywheel of early stage investing in Austin back in the 70s. And IBM came to Austin, was recruiting for talent for the key punch system in the 70s. So during this period of time is really when the tech sector was born in Austin, and many of these companies are still phenomenal employers in the ecosystem and great contributors to all that we do here at the University of Texas. You'll see names around campus, you'll see guest speakers. A lot of what they've given back to the community is at the University of Texas. I'm going to skip the commercialization life cycle in the spirit of telling the history story, but so we come out of the 70s, and just remember this: Whole Foods was born as a startup in 1978, now owned by Amazon. We don't really think of that in the context of Austin's history, but what a phenomenal success. And the reason I share that is that angel investment started small, and it's built over the last decades, and it's resulted in a place where there's a lot of startups today. So this guy, Pike Powers, was an attorney turned entrepreneur, and got really involved in economic development, workforce development. And he got the bright idea to take all these big companies that I just talked about, put them together, and they put it together in something called MCC, which was a consortium of 20 tech companies. And they hired this guy, Admiral Bobby Inman, and ended up going to Washington, D.C. to change something that has fundamentally changed the path of technology and commercialization at the University of Texas. They went to D.C. and said that there's an antitrust law that prohibits the university from participating in value creation from things that it invents. And that really made it difficult to create entrepreneurship out of a university sponsored research environment. And so when the bill was passed in the 80s, it allowed institutions that are publicly funded, like UT, to get more involved in their own IP and to start to create companies. So this was a fundamental, pivotal moment. Companies like 3M moved to Austin. Semiconductor companies started popping up in Austin. Software companies, manufacturing companies all moved to Austin. So it's a critical time. And then in the, so that's MCC. You might have seen the building on Mopac. I'm not sure if somebody is annotating. That's not cool. So at the end of the 90s, a company spun out of IBM called Tivoli. And in 7 years, Tivoli went from nothing to $750 million valuation and liquidity event. And all these companies in some way, shape, or form are tied back to that Tivoli exit. And as somebody that's been in the Austin ecosystem for 30 plus years, I can look at that list and I can tell you some of Austin's most prolific angel investors who fund the entrepreneurial ecosystem here are people who made wealth and created great companies from this list. Additionally, in the 80s, a company called Trilogy came to Austin and started recruiting and brought a lot of tech talent here, including my colleague Josh Baer, who came from Carnegie Mellon University to work at Trilogy. And there's a lot of really great tech leaders in town who came from Trilogy, who was known for a really great educational program for people that they hired. So now we've got money in Austin that's entrepreneurial friendly. We've got talent that's been trained. We've had some success stories, and we find ourselves, here we are in the 80s, and I bet you guys know who this fellow is. In 1984, Michael Dell launched his company out of his dorm room at UT. It was called PCs Limited at the time, and pioneered a new way of selling computers. So fast forward, also in the 80s, Austin Technology Incubator, which is still to this day, 30 years later, here on campus producing fantastic results. That's George Kosmetsky. And the Kosmetsky era of entrepreneurship and commercialization was born at the University of Texas. Since then, there's been over 10 IPOs, 50 significant merger and acquisition activities, $3 billion in economic impact, $1.7 billion in fundraised, 300 graduated companies. And the numbers have probably grown since a couple of years ago when I gathered those. So all of that came out of this ecosystem we're talking about. And the reason I bring it up is that we've got, 300 plus people listening to this story because they're interested in entrepreneurship, and they're here out of excitement and enthusiasm for what exists on UT Austin's campus and what exists in Austin writ large. And we stand on the shoulders of many giants and decades of hard work at this time, where now we see 500 of the Fortune 500, data is suggesting that 50% have already been displaced in the last 20 years, and 75% of the S&P 500 will be displaced in the next 20 years. So profound market share is in the process of changing hands. We've all lived it and will continue to live it, because what's really interesting is while the internet seems like it's been here a long time, it hasn't. And technology has been in this evolutionary phase. And so we're at, to me, one of the most exciting times in the history of Austin, the history of UT, which is we now have lots of success stories. We have all the ingredients, the talent, the financing, the ideas, and the success stories to really kick into the next 20, 30 years in Austin. So we're in such an exciting time. Some of the success stories that have come out of this era include VRBO, which started as HomeAway. They're now owned by Expedia. So it's Expedia now. And that started as a $405 million investment and from venture capital firms like Austin Ventures and Redpoint. They exited for $4 billion, right? Huge liquidity event, still employ a lot of people. Started in 2004, also started in 2004. Indeed is well over $1 billion in market valuation, founded right here in Austin, #1 job source in the nation. Fantastic company, very innovative. Storable, which started as Sparefoot, born right here in Austin. They did a $250 million financing. I guess it was in COVID years, I can't remember, maybe a year ago, year and some change, year and a half, maybe 2 with COVID, but really large financing event in Austin's history. Also, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Storable did not do that. I think they raised about 80 million. WP Engine was a $250 million financing from Silver Lake at the time. And shout out to Heather Bruner, the CEO, and the executive team, Jason Cohen, the founder. Really wonderful folks who you'll see in Josh Bear's Longhorn Startup class. You'll have the opportunity to see some of these people speak, and it's just phenomenal to hear the stories of these companies, and they create internships and they hire folks, and just really lucky to have these companies. I'd be remiss not to leave out Bumble. Whitney and her team and Sarah, they have built the largest IPO in Austin's history, $2 billion market valuation these days. Outdoorsy is another one, right? These are all just names we banty about. I can't leave off South by Southwest. It's coming up here in October or in March. And these companies put $300 and $400 million in economic impact into Austin every year. I mentioned Whole Foods, Kendra Scott, another women-led company. UT Austin is lucky to have the Kendra Scott Well Institute as a function of that. Okay, so you might be getting tired because this list used to be onesie, twosie, and we kind of would draw the story out because, well, that's all we had. And now I get to bore you to death with the story of multiple billion-dollar companies right here in our backyard. Not a tech company on the surface, but Austin City Limits, which was founded by C3 Presents, who also produces Lollapalooza and many of the festivals around the globe. Huge technical infrastructure and a great employer, huge economic impact here. So you get the point. Austin's built some amazing companies that have consequently put us on the top of, I'm going to say every list, both good and bad, but we're going to focus on the good, right? Texas is at the epicenter of economic stability in our country. We have huge startup activity. We sort of banty back and forth in Texas is #1, #2. Austin in particular bumps around as #1 or #2 in terms of startup activity. Couldn't be in a more active place in terms of the numbers of startups. We're consistently one of the top 100 best places to live. We are, both in terms of startup companies, but also as well as small businesses. It's a great place to start a business in general, whether you want to do a tech company or just a small business. I'm super passionate about building small businesses. So Indeed, we mentioned those folks. It's a great place to hire people. Lots of value for employers to hire people in Texas. It's a very job-friendly place. Google named us a tech hub early on, and we remain one of the tech hubs. Consequently, you see a lot of activity here with Google and some of the larger organizations. And then, of course, Capital Factory, which Amanda mentioned, Longhorn Startup. I spent many years teaching Longhorn Startup with Josh Baer. I'm a co-founder of Capital Factory, and Capital Factory has been reinventing itself in the time of COVID, just like everybody else. And we've been the epicenter of all things startup here in the city of Austin, and welcome UT students with wide arms. So if you haven't been down to Capital Factory, please make your way down there and take advantage of some of the activity there. Capital Factory talks about a startup manifesto. The reason I like to bring them up is for those of you that are interested in Austin, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio. Capital Factory has locations, programming support in all of those areas, and is really uniquely able to connect students to opportunities in those areas. And Josh is really passionate about that. So there are many accelerators. I focus on Capital Factory, not so much because I've been a part of it, but because it's such a robust ecosystem. But there are also many other accelerator programs, co-working spaces. This list is not exhaustive, and quite frankly, it's changed a bit since COVID. So check on some of them, but lots of accelerators, prolific angel network. So if you're trying to raise funding, there's Baylor Angel Network, Central Texas Angel Network, Cowtown Angels in Fort Worth, the Aggies. I've got their own angel network here in Austin. Notley, where I'm a partner, we have the Beam Angel Network, which is exclusively for women. There's Houston area angel network, very active. These are all places that are sources to raise your first time funds, and Texas couldn't be more robust. Co-working space, there's a lot of them these days. You can find something geographically close to you. You can find something that's topic specific, that's of interest for you. There's places for consumer product goods companies. There's places for SaaS companies. There's social impact related companies, on campus, off campus. There's lots of places to meet. Co-working isn't just about renting a desk. It's about going someplace and leveraging the networking that's going on there to find co-founders and technical co-founders and partners and people to beta test your product. So when you think of co-working, think outside the box about how it might be valuable for you. Lots of diversity related initiatives. If you're a woman interested in the coding ecosystem, there's Girls Who Code, there's Women Who Code. If you're LGBTQ and you're interested in the queer ecosystem, lots of resources out there for that. There's a number of design oriented programs that look at bias and how to educate yourself on it, how to train yourself about it, and how to incorporate it into the products that you build. So Austin is a great resource for that, and a continually evolving one. And then for the science and engineering folks, the Defense Innovation Center for Defense Innovation at Capital Factory has representation from most of the branches of the military, as well as many of the consulting companies that work alongside them. There is phenomenal resources for non-dilutive funding for tech-driven products out of this program. So you'll learn a lot about CIBR funding and STTR funding here on campus. If you don't know what that is, definitely take a workshop from some of the programs. Texas Innovation Center, I believe, is doing one. I know there's a biodesign program that Texas Innovation Center launched and Texas Venture Lab support. These are great programs of federally funded funding resources, and get to know them, get to learn how to apply for those projects. Also, ATI is great at connecting to those resources. So for things that cost a lot of money, materials science, nanoscience, things that require physical production of product, this is a great place to get to know folks. Lots of meetups, even in COVID time. A lot of these organizations are meeting virtually. It's a really low stress way to get to know other programmers, other co-founders, other people interested in health innovation, other people interested in AI and machine learning. So you'll get great resources on campus, but don't forget to check out meetup.com. Most of these places are listed there. I listed a few just for presentation's sake. And then if you want to learn skills outside of the academic side, there's Hackouts, which are free, or hackathons that are free, where you can go practice your skills. You can try on what it's like to be a co-founder for a long weekend. Founders Academy, which is run by my dear friend Gordon Doherty, who is just a great kind of boot camp for folks interested in founders. Bunker Labs focuses on veterans. Div Inc. focuses on Black and Brown entrepreneurs, and 3-Day Startup and Startup Weekend Hackout are both hackathons. So those pretty much have been happening every year for a good while. There's many others, but they come and go. So I list the ones that have been around long enough to stick to the slide. I mentioned Gordon's program, Founders Academy. Definitely check that out if you're not in a major program yet that teaches you these skills. This is a quick way to learn them. Coding schools, if you're not at UT to do computer science, but you're still interested, check out the coding schools. Austin Startup Week is going to happen this year. It's going to be October 4th through 7th. There'll be Startup Week on campus. There'll be Startup Week all over Austin. And so definitely keep your eye on that. Check out austinstartupweek.com. South by Southwest is on for this year, March 11th through 20th. It needs no explanation. World famous for film, music, and interactive. Glad to see they made it through the storm, and that we're going to continue to have that in Austin. And then if you're interested in, kind of tracking this stuff in real time, there's a number of social media connects. You can check out Plug Into the Austin Startup Scene, which Josh Baer curates and keeps that up to date. You can check out Austin Tech Live for stories from leaders in the ecosystem. You can check out a whole bunch of folks on Medium if you like to read. And probably, I know a lot of y'all aren't on Facebook, but the Austin Startups and Austin Digital Jobs and Open Coffee Austin all post on Facebook, and they're all great resources for getting connected in the Austin ecosystem outside of UT Austin. And then for those of you that are interested in policy, in the intersection of policy with the tech ecosystem, Austin Tech Alliance is a great resource for that, as well as the Austin Monitor, which is just made themselves free. So sign up for the Austin Monitor if you want to stay in communication about a lot of the political side of what's going on in Austin and the state of Texas. So if you want to find a co-founder or a job or employee, Capital Factory Jobs, Austin Digital Jobs is extremely active. And I love this community because they're very helpful about giving each other tips. So if you're building a resume or portfolio, a lot of folks here, a lot of veteran folks who can give you some great feedback. Let's see. I think that pretty much cuts it in terms of some of the resources to connect to. Mentorship, huge. Take advantage of all the mentoring that's available to you from on campus to off campus. Capital Factory does office hours. Notley does office hours. Programs like Techstars and Mass Challenge are out in the community, and they are filled with phenomenal mentors. Definitely check each of them out and find the one that's best for you and take advantage of it. 3-Day Startup, I don't have information on when their next hackathon is going to be, but it's a wonderful experience, and everyone can give one weekend of their life to go check out that. So do that. Women in Tech is going to be coming up. That is $100,000 for a woman-owned business and a great lineup of speakers. Hackout, I believe they're going to do this year, don't have dates yet. That's an LGBTQ hackathon. And then, of course, Amanda mentioned Texas Venture Labs, which I run. We are a graduate student focused program. So if we have any graduate students on the call, definitely encourage you to check out the practicum class, which I teach, as well as the Accelerator program, which has a lot of great companies from the community in it. And then we recently launched a fellowship program for folks that want to get some behind the scenes experience. And that application is open as we speak. I think it closes like tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. But check out those resources. We'd be happy to connect you. And then Longhorn Startup, we've been teaching that for a very long time. I'm not teaching it this year, but Josh is still teaching it. And we're getting geared up for Longhorn Startup Lab next semester. So we do the seminar this semester, which is guest speakers and learning about entrepreneurship. And then next semester, if you have a startup you want to work on, this is the class you want to be in. You get class credit for working on your startup and get connected to a number of phenomenal folks. So that's a background on Austin. I think we're coming in right on time. Thanks for listening to my history lesson. And I hope everyone here will take the time to get engaged both on and off campus to make the most of your experience. And with that, thanks Amanda and Herb Kelleher Center for having me. Always great to partner, and I look forward to seeing y'all in the expo.